Good evening. This is a meeting of the Norfolk Board of Health on April 23rd, 2019. It's about 7 o'clock. And we have a fairly light agenda. But we're going to start with a continuing discussion on the restriction of the sale of tobacco products. And we have with us some expert witnesses in this area. Who wants to go first?
Actually, before we start, could I just make a couple of comments?
Oh, okay.
Okay?
Sure.
Okay.
Sure.
It'll just take a couple of minutes. And the reason that I'm making these comments is because we actually started this discussion back in December, or actually November, but in December, at our December 4th meeting, Dr. Lester Hartman, who's a pediatrician from Mansfield Westwood Pediatrics, presented to the board his medical opinion about vaping among high school students and middle school students. And he characterized the current usage as the worst epidemic he's seen among children and young adults in his years as a pediatrician. He said the tobacco industry has targeted the young adult population through advertising and the incorporation of flavors into nicotine delivery systems. And there are numerous delivery systems called e-cigarettes, but the most popular is Juul. And this product looks like a USB jump drive and can be recharged in a laptop or computer. There are many additional delivery systems besides Juul, all with the same intention of concealing from others what people are doing. So how do e-cigarettes work? Nicotine in e-liquids is readily absorbed into the bloodstream when a person uses an e-cigarette, and upon entering the blood, the nicotine stimulants epinephrine or adrenaline, and the epinephrine stimulates the central nervous system, increases blood pressure, breathing, and heart rate. And with most addictive substances, nicotine increases the levels of chemicals in the brain called dopamine, which affects parts of the brain that control the reward center, pleasure, for example, from natural behaviors such as eating. These feelings motivate some people to use nicotine again and again despite risks to their health. And nicotine also affects the development of brain circuits that control attention and learning. Besides nicotine, e-cigarettes also contain cancer-causing chemicals, ultrafine particles, heavy metals such as lead, chromium, nickel, and tin, and flavorings such as diacetyl, which is a chemical linked to a serious lung disease, popcorn lung, or bronchiolitis obliterans. So Dr. Hartman's not the only person in the medical community who's worried about the use of these cigarettes, these e-cigarettes. There was a press release from Dr. Scott Gottlieb, of the FDA commissioner, which was released in November of 2018, stating that there is an epidemic of e-cigarette use and nicotine addiction among our kids. He stated he will not allow a generation of children to become addicted to nicotine through e-cigarettes. And so the FDA has in the pipeline ways that they are trying to contain the use of e-cigarettes, and they are going after the manufacturers. A survey shows that 74% of kids get e-cigarettes from retail locations, 52% from social media, and 6% from the internet. So just the key number is 74% of kids get e-cigarettes from retail locations. The American Pediatric Association stated in November of 2018, tobacco is a major threat to our children's health, no matter the form it takes. New data confirm what pediatricians have long been warning: e-cigarettes are threatening to addict a generation of young people to nicotine. Sarah McColgan from the Tobacco Control Program, director of the Tobacco Control Program of the Mass Health Officers Association, was also present at the December 4th meeting. She's here with us tonight. She brought to our attention the fact that over 140 municipalities in Massachusetts have modified their tobacco regulations to restrict the sale of flavored tobacco products. And this accounts for approximately 60% of the population in Massachusetts. So here tonight we have a draft of updated tobacco regulations. Note that the yellow highlighted areas are completely new to our regulations, and the green highlighted areas deal with additional options related to menthol and mint flavors. And we can discuss the regulations. Any questions about?
No,
No.
it sounded familiar.
Okay.
Well, let me ask our guests first if you have anything to add prior to our discussions on this draft.
Just a little update, 146 communities now have policies restricting flavored tobacco products, and that's 62.6%.
Oops, yeah, we need to get you on.
She gave us instructions, I forgot. Okay, so 146 communities now have policies restricting flavored tobacco products, and that's 62.6% of the state population. So every week or every couple weeks, another town or another few towns get added to the mix, and the communities that are your neighbors that have done regulation along these lines are Canton, Dedham, Franklin, Medfield, Millis, Natick, Needham, Norwood, Sherburne, Walpole, and Westwood. Rentham is in the contemplating process, and so is Plainville. Norwood, met with their board yesterday, and they're going beyond that. They have had the flavor restriction in place since April of 2018, but it has an exemption for mint, menthol, and wintergreen. They're going to remove that, or they're looking at removing that exemption, so that the mint, menthol, and wintergreen would also be moved out of your corner convenience stores and into adult-only retail tobacco stores. And in addition, they're going to put a cap on the number of adult-only retail tobacco stores in town, so that they don't end up with, 15 of them selling flavored tobacco products.
May I ask, of the 146 communities, is that a principal approach that's being taken to keep these materials out of the hands of young folks, is to create this restriction that they only be sold in adult tobacco shops?
It's one of the things that can be done. It all, is kind of like a puzzle, and piecing all the pieces together. The policy is one of the things that can be done. Community education with parents, with school folks, just regular
Well,
people.
it's
in the
multifaceted,
community.
certainly, but in terms of regulations being
In terms of
enforced by, say, a Board
regulations,
of Health.
This is probably the most effective thing that you can do, not only to restrict the typical flavors, but also if you're looking at it, to possibly not exempt the mint, menthol, and wintergreen, because more towns are moving in that direction also, and looking at those as no different than any other flavor like cherry or apple or bubble gum, and removing them from the corner stores also. So what it would leave in your stores are things like, the traditional Marlboro flavored tobacco, as opposed to a flavored tobacco.
Do you have a number of towns that have actually restricted the mint and menthol of the 146?
Sure. At this point, Somerville took a vote in December, and their policy was effective April 1st, so still brand new. They're doing very soft enforcement, going around and meeting with all the retailers. The retailers so far are pretty much in compliance. It's going really well. There is a lawsuit from 3 retailers in Somerville against the Somerville Board of Health. I had understood that motions were going to be heard tomorrow, but now it seems like that's been rescheduled. So that's going forward, but the city of Somerville is going forward in their enforcement.
So that's only Somerville of the 146 right now?
Needham has also passed removing the exemption of mint, menthol,
Okay.
wintergreen. They take effect on July 1st. No lawsuit has been filed against Needham at this point. Ashland has also voted to do the same, and they take effect on January 1st, and no lawsuit has been filed against Ashland. Sherburne is probably maybe a few weeks away from taking a vote. I think probably at their next regular Board of Health meeting, they'll be taking a vote. Walpole is also looking at removing the exemption, and Dover did vote to remove the exemption and went beyond it, and I think they're gonna relook at their wording, so they don't have a final thing at this point. There are a number of communities that are, further along in the process and looking at it and getting ready to go to public hearing on it.
Thanks.
So could I just ask a question? If we were to make this, prohibit the sale of flavored tobacco products, does that allow e-cigarettes that have nicotine only in them to still be sold, or e-cigarettes that would, at least the item with, that you could put marijuana in? I mean, they couldn't be sold in a retail store. I don't think marijuana can be sold in a retail store.
No,
Thank you.
but marijuana is being sold in, marijuana's been
Don't.
found in retail stores as part of kind of a giveaway. It hasn't happened in Norfolk, but it's happened in, I believe, Malden. It's happening in Boston a lot. So if you go in and buy something, you might pay an inflated price for that item, but with that price, you'll get a couple marijuana joints. So finding some crafty ways to be selling marijuana out of regular, retail stores. As far as e-cigarettes without a flavor,
Yes.
what Somerville has done is they've even gone beyond the exemption. They have decided that in the case of electronic cigarettes, tobacco is an additive, therefore it is a flavor. So they have restricted all e-cigarettes to adult-only stores under the premise that the tobacco is being added into that e-cigarette, where it's not being added into a tobacco leaf. It's natural in a tobacco leaf, but it's not natural in an e-cigarette, so therefore they're classifying it as a flavor in an e-cigarette. So all e-cigarettes are going into adult-only tobacco stores. Brookline is doing something kind of interesting in that they're removing the exemption for adult-only tobacco stores, so that it will in effect not allow any adult-only tobacco stores in the city of Brookline. So boards are being very aggressive in looking at this because of e-cigarettes and because of Juul predominantly.
Well, do you have anything else to add before we start discussing?
Is this just new resources that we have right here?
Can you tell us a little bit what you just handed here, what this is telling us?
Sure, that's the municipal list for the municipalities that have, as of the middle of April, passed the flavor restriction. And then you'll see there are a few of them that have a little star next to the
Yep.
name, Needham, Ashland, and Somerville. And those are the three that have definitely taken the vote at this point to remove the exemption for menthol.
So the flavored other tobacco products are the e-cigarettes.
Not just e-cigarettes, cigars, all sorts of flavored combustible
Okay.
tobacco products also. But the e-cigarettes are also would be removed and the juice that goes into e-cigarettes.
Under these regulations, so what's left in convenience stores that they sell? Just plain cigarettes?
Or just plain cigars, natural tobacco cigars, natural tobacco cigarettes. So Marlboros, things like that. The stuff that was there when I was a kid.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, that's fair.
Let's let our guests know. You're next. Okay.
Hi, so I'm Mary Cole. I'm from the Greater Boston Tobacco Free Community Partnership. I was here a few meetings ago. Jeff, I don't think you were here when I was here, though.
Potentially.
Right? I don't remember you. But yeah, so basically with my job, I go around, I have 56 communities I serve. I do a lot of education on e-cigarettes with school staff, with parents, and I kind of provide a public health approach to vaping prevention. So one of the biggest things I recommend people is policy, like these, specifically the flavor restriction, because we know policy impacts everyone in a community. And it's one of the most powerful things you can do for a public health approach. We also know that kids go to gas stations and convenience stores, and right next to the candy and the slushies are those tobacco products that are really appealing to kids, and that's a tactic done by the tobacco industry. So that is something that I think is really important to convey, which I know you guys understand as well, is that the tobacco and vaping industry are targeting kids specifically, and that's why they also target convenience stores and gas stations to sell these products. With the flavors specifically, I mean, flavors are a leading reason why kids use e-cigarettes. It makes them seem harmless. It masks the taste of tobacco, and it's clear that it's marketed to kids. With the menthol piece, so again, this is a new piece to the flavor restriction that we're including menthol, and it was exempt before. And the reason it was exempt before is due to Sarah could talk better about this, but it was due to prior policies where menthol was exempt. And menthol was exempt because the tobacco industry lobbied to get it exempt. But menthol, mint, wintergreen is a flavor. Anyone would say it's a flavor. It's one of the leading flavors that kids use as well, and with e-cigarettes. And so, I mean, that really is a big push with the mint, menthol wintergreen. Some with the menthol cigarettes as well, something to note, we know that menthol actually makes it easier to initiate cigarettes as well. Menthol masks the taste of tobacco even more than a regular cigarette would. And it actually increases addiction and makes it harder for smokers to quit, the menthol cigarettes specifically. So it is kind of crazy that menthol was exempted from this all along, but again, it was just due to how regulations were before, and with Massachusetts, we were unsure if there would be a lawsuit because they were just kind of following that. But now towns are saying, like, this is a problem, mint is a flavor, so that's why they're going forward with that. And then what I passed out to you guys, there's a new campaign by the Massachusetts Department of Public Health, and it's a campaign to educate kids about e-cigarettes. So I really just wanted to share that with you guys to share with your communities. So it's called, Vapes and Cigarettes, Different Products, Same Dangers. So there's a poster, a double-sided handout, and these little mirror clings that have facts on them that can stick to, like, bathroom mirrors and stuff at, like, schools and organizations where youth are. So yeah, this is like only a few weeks old. It just came out. DPH launched it. They did focus groups with Massachusetts youth across the state. And really what they heard the kids say was, like, just give us the facts straight, like, don't do anything fancy. And they also didn't associate cigarettes and e-cigarettes / vapes, and so that's kind of what this campaign is saying there are similarities. There's cancer-causing chemicals, there's addiction due to the nicotine. So yeah, so that's why that came about. There's also a website on there, a YouTube video out there, an Instagram account. So just to pass on to the schools. It's a pretty good resource.
Mhm.
Yeah.
You know, one thing we've been talking about is this multi-prong approach, and that, you know, policy is important, but after that, you still need to have an awful lot of reinforcement. And the role the Board of Health can play in that reinforcement process is something we as a board, I think, and those who we work with, like the MRC, for example, need to think of as well, because there are a lot of different ways that we can attack this, but we need to basically follow as many as we can if we're really gonna have any impact, especially among younger people, who don't even know about Board of Health policy necessarily, unless things just simply disappear from the countertop of the places where they go.
And I know, like Rentham, that was a hearing that we went to for Rentham. Yeah, I think it was.
It was a hearing to get public input.
Okay. Like the superintendent of King Philip and the assistant principal showed up in support of the flavor restriction. So I know they would show up here probably as well to be in support. And that's just to show that the schools are literally, they want everything too. And they're looking for resources. And again, I think I shared even more resources with you guys last time. So yeah, I mean, schools are looking for everything.
And the schools are aware of the new campaign that you put out and where to get the information. And
I'm trying to, so I just have like a big contact list that I add people to.
Uh-huh.
So KP is like a little bit newer to my contact list, so I'm not positive if everyone's in there. So I'm happy to work with Betsy to make sure that stuff gets out. Because did you get my email, Betsy?
Recently?
Probably like 2 weeks ago. Okay, you're not my contact list. I'll make sure I email you so we can follow up with the schools with all
Yeah,
of
it's not
that.
like, because there's a lot of products here that obviously they may want to put in the schools, so.
Yeah, and
obviously-
they also, there's, so on the back is the new look at nicotine addiction piece, and that's the campaign for adults.
Mhm.
And on there, so it's at getout.org, and they have a section for schools, and they actually have really great advice on there of how schools can use the new youth campaign materials, you know, like just in classroom settings, that double-sided handout, or like have kids hang the stuff up around the
Mhm.
school as well, include it in school announcements.
You should obviously contact King Philip
Mhm.
and Freeman Kennedy as well to get a contact for them too.
Yeah, happy to get in touch with everyone, definitely.
Hope not HOD. I hope not the HOD, but.
Elaine, do you have a question? Or a comment?
I didn't ask the question, but I can see on there from, I didn't read that far away, about smokeless tobacco. I was just curious about the chewing tobacco as well, is the flavored chewing tobacco.
It's included.
Good.
Yeah, all flavored tobacco.
I think you folks were looking at some other policy also as far as things that you don't have now that might be impactful. And one of them was to raise the price of cigars to $2.50. Right now, you can buy cheap cigars for less than $1. Raise the price, kids are less likely to buy them. So if you did the flavor restriction, that would remove the flavored cigars from stores. But as we said, that would leave the tobacco flavored cigars in the stores. And if the price was raised, kids would be less likely to buy them. So I've got, you've got, you want, Ivana, pass that on for me? So you've got some communities around you that have done that: Dedham, Franklin, Medfield, Medway, Millis, Natick, Needham, Norwood, Plainville, Westwood, Walpole, and Sherburne. But in total, 174 communities have passed the restriction on cigars that would raise the price for a single cigar to $2.50 and for a multi-pack to $5. And then one of the other things that your current regulations are lacking that is standard in a lot of 170 towns and cities at this point is banning the sale of blunt wraps. And a lot of communities around you have done that. This will be the last thing you have to pass out. So Dedham and Franklin, Medfield, Medway, pretty much the same communities. Plainville, Sherburne, Walpole, Westwood have pass that where blunt wraps cannot be sold within that community.
What's a
Do
blunt wrap?
you folks know what a blunt wrap is? Okay.
Sorry.
It's
I
defined
should have
in here.
brought, do you have one? Yeah, unfortunately, mine are so old that they're crumpled up. But what it is it comes in a foil wrapper, and there's usually 2 in the wrapper. They're a broadleaf tobacco, and it's just rolled around like a plastic straw to kind of keep it, rolled and hopefully keep it moist and everything until the user is ready to use it. And basically what kids are using it for is rolling very big marijuana joints. It's a fairly good-sized leaf of tobacco, and kids are not rolling their own cigarettes.
So this is just a wrapper to put whatever you want inside. Is that what that is?
Yeah, and they're generally flavored. So if you don't pass the blunt wrap ban, but you do pass the flavor restriction, it would move them out of stores. But if you ban blunt wraps altogether, they not even unflavored ones would be allowed to be in the stores.
And I think a lot of people don't realize that blunt wraps have tobacco in them in some cases. And I say this because I had a friend who her boyfriend actually took the flavored cigars. He left some tobacco, but took out most of the tobacco, but then used the outside wrap, which is tobacco, and put marijuana in it. And then, so I was telling her about my job, and then she was like, "You've been smoking tobacco too?" So like, I think there is that misperception around there as well among people that they don't even know that tobacco is in cigars or those blunt wraps, and sometimes too.
Okay, well, we have a proposal for essentially restricting, well, the part that we're looking at, I believe, focuses on the restriction of flavored tobacco products. Now, the green includes references to menthol, mint, and wintergreen. I'm hearing suggestions certainly that that be included in the list of flavored products. I'm kind of wondering if this is simply, history in action, because menthol cigarettes have been around for generations. So maybe they were somehow able to sneak that one by simply because they've been around for so long. I don't know what the argument was why they wouldn't be included.
In 2009, when the FDA got jurisdiction over cigarettes and everything, they banned flavors in cigarettes on the national level and exempted menthol. So grape cigarettes were no longer allowed to be sold in the United States, cherry-flavored cigarettes, but mint menthol and wintergreen was exempt by the federal government because of the strong lobbying of the tobacco industry. A lot of their money is in the sale of menthol. They target specific communities for the sale of menthol. It's the instance of folks in communities of color using menthol, wintergreen tobacco products is much higher than in white communities. So the industry has really targeted specific communities. And they got the exemption from the feds because the industry is so strong. So what the feds are acknowledging at this point, the FDA is, that menthol wintergreen is a flavor and is a problem. It's a very attractive flavor to kids. As Mary said, it makes it easier for them to use the product, to hide the smell, so they're using menthol wintergreen products in increasing numbers.
Have you seen any of the communities that are banning these flavors now? If there's some type of federal exemption for the mint and menthol, on the municipal level, if you're banning flavors, wouldn't they automatically include those? And have you seen any communities just kind of make that leap that flavors are flavors? We're on the local level calling any flavor being restricted. Doesn't matter what the federal government calls these things.
There are some communities that haven't done the flavor restriction that are making,
Right.
that are looking and thinking about making the leap all the way. The reason why probably 4 or 5 years ago it started that we didn't encourage it then was because we modeled our language after a court case in Providence and the Providence language. Providence restricted the sale of tobacco products to adult only, so they had the exemption for adult only, and they had the exemption for mint, menthol, and wintergreen. Providence was sued by the tobacco industry. They won the lawsuit. We're in the same circuit, federal circuit court as Providence, so we knew that we could use their language exactly the same and be confident that we would win any lawsuit that came about because of that. So that's why we went that far. Then in the meantime, other places around the country, San Francisco, other communities in California, I think Minneapolis, other communities across the country have included the mint, menthol, wintergreen in the ban, and so we feel very confident that it will stand up in court.
But you feel that it should be called out specifically, as he says, we say we're banning flavors and mint and menthol, as opposed to just leaving as banning
flavors
flavors.
with no exemption. I mean,
I'm saying, do you think it needs to be called out specifically in these regulations, or by saying we're banning flavors, do you think we're covering the whole gamut?
when you, if you choose to not have an exemption, your definition in the definitions section, can you, Betsy, can you pop down a few pages to the definitions? Your definition of characterizing flavor, down one more, okay, characterizing flavor. So right now, you see I've got it highlighted
Right.
in green. We would remove the green highlight.
Right.
It would be, if you pop down one more, it would be listed with the other flavors. So it would say like chocolate, vanilla, honey, mint, menthol, wintergreen, candy, cocoa. It would be included with those flavors because it would no longer be exempt.
It says mint and menthol. Yeah.
So the definitions, basically, we're attempting to
Already
be
in there.
complete here. Though, of course, the worry is this a for instance list, or is this the inclusive list?
The tobacco industry can come up with
Well, that's exactly
some
my
sort of
point.
weird
Right.
flavor, and they have. What they've done is
Et cetera.
they've labeled things strangely. They can't label it grape anymore, so they'll label it purple passion. But if it quacks like a duck, if it walks like a duck, it's a duck. And so when you open it and you smell it, and it smells like grape, it doesn't matter what it's being called. It's got grape additives in it.
It says either taste or aroma, so the smell would
Right.
also define it.
Yeah, and it's not a packaging issue, it's a question of are we covering all the aromas?
Right.
That could possibly-
Do we need an et cetera at the end
All
of
the
this?
things that we can think of at this point.
All right.
And it's been pretty exhaustive, and it's also part of a kind of a national look at all this, and nationally, what are people saying? And so we kind of, look to other states. They tend to look to Massachusetts more than we look to other states, but we've looked to other states that have gone a little bit further.
Now, we do have menthol and mint listed under this list here, too, beyond
Okay,
the
so I-
green area.
Well, you
Yeah,
have them
it
both,
is
yeah,
there.
green and yellow.
So it would stay there if
The green came out,
If you took out the exemption, but if you left in the exemption,
that would come
it
out.
would stay where the green highlight is.
Okay.
So the proposal that you've helped craft for us essentially limits the sales of these flavored materials to the smoking bars and the smoke shops for adults.
Correct.
The prohibitions against the other things you just recently gave us, the blunt wraps and the cigar limitations, actually, the 250 or up, that's across the board. That is for any sale of any kind, from what I'm reading here.
The blunt wraps is exactly what it says, banning the sale of blunt wraps within Norfolk.
Yep.
Raising the cigar prices, yes, it would be a cigar that's being sold in a convenience-type store or a cigar that's being sold in a smoke shop, tobacconist. Yep.
And to date, do we have any comments from the retailers in town?
No, but we haven't asked them for any comments.
We have, I thought we didn't ask them for that? Well, if we're gonna get comments, we wanna have them comment on these new ideas too, about the pricing and the blunts wraps.
The difference in the pricing is that they get to keep the extra money, the retailer does. So if they're selling something for 50 cents now, and you raise the price to $2.50, that's an extra $2 in their pocket that they didn't have before. But it prevents, it makes kids more thoughtful about buying them and less inclined to buy them. But it's pretty hard for a retailer to come in and say, well, because kids aren't buying them anymore, you're gonna cut my profit. Well, that's,
Well, I mean, there are, just be a little realistic here, there are adults with limited means who may not be wanting to spend that kind of money for a cigar too. And so, I mean, there
That's
is a
true.
double edge on this one.
that's true. But for every adult that is maybe not wanting to spend that kind of money on a cigar, you're probably stopping, 2 or 3 or 4 or 5 kids from buying it.
Yeah, although we're taking these things out of the convenience stores, they're only gonna be sold in places where you gotta be 21 to walk in the door.
They can still be sold in convenience stores if they are tobacco flavored and don't have another flavor added to them. So just like Marlboro's, a plain cigar
Yeah.
could still be sold in a convenience store.
Well, is there a halfway measure here where we could say that any, inexpensive cigar has to be sold in a tobacco shop and not in a convenience store?
But an expensive cigar could be sold in a convenience store?
Well, if it's only tobacco and nothing else. I
It
mean,
would be
right now
over,
they-
it would be
right
over
now they are.
$2.50, so the regulation already does that. If you're saying only an inexpensive, so you're saying don't raise the price of an inexpensive cigar, but make sure it goes into an adult-only store.
That's what I was wondering about.
Flavors and non-flavors, all cigars?
I'm focusing right now on the things that we are not already restricting to those smoke shops. Like, for example, unflavored tobacco products, they're not restricted, except if we say so. And what we're saying so is if it's less than $2.50 a cigar, for example, there's gonna be a blanket restriction on that. It's not gonna be allowed at all. What I'm wondering is whether you could have the inexpensive cigar still being sold at a tobacco shop. And then you would still have an expensive cigar being sold in a convenience store along with Marlboros and all the rest of the regular tobacco materials.
No town has done that yet. Guess I'm wondering where you would draw the line on inexpensive and.
Well, you've
Well,
done
what
it
you're
for us.
saying,
It's
$2.50. Non-flavored cigars sell for a minimum of $2.50 in retail stores, is what you're saying.
Right. So what I'm suggesting is that we simply limit that for the places where we know young folk go.
I don't think you can charge one amount in one store and another amount in another store.
Well, not for the same product. I'm simply
Basically,
saying,
And that would be up to the retailer too, if they think they can
yeah.
get away with it.
Nobody's done it.
yeah.
Nobody's done it.
I see what you're saying, though. It makes sense. It's a halfway measure.
Well, I tell you what, I think 99% of this makes perfect sense, and I think we're pretty close to 100% behind it. Or-
we still need to address this in green, e-cigarettes, because this is an option.
The regular tobacco,
Right.
of the nicotine and vapor.
Electronic
E-cigarettes.
cigarettes, right?
Yeah.
So if we restrict e-cigarettes across the board, that would include whether they have flavor or just tobacco,
So you're talking about
nicotine.
doing the Somerville method of restricting all e-cigarettes to adult-only stores. And it would be regardless of whether or not they were flavored or just had the tobacco flavor. So you're basically calling tobacco a flavor in electronic devices. Yeah, that's what Somerville has done.
What section are you referring to,
Which is
Fran?
that?
It's under definitions, under E,
Yeah.
for e-cigarettes. It's in green.
Each one of these looks like
Well,
different.
it's on,
Yeah, I was on the bottom,
it's a little
isn't it?
bit
Here it is,
different,
here it
yeah.
is.
Okay.
I'm looking at what I printed.
Well, that's the definition of an e-cigarette.
Right, where's the put the
Right.
bands in?
Now, where do we say it later on?
Under G,
Sale
sale
of
of
flavored-
flavored tobacco products.
Oh, under the green sheets here.
Right.
Those person shall sell or distribute or sold an e-cigarette. Okay. Yeah,
So in yellow, it's just flavored tobacco products.
well,
So
if we
an
do this in layers,
e-cigarette, that-
flavored was up on top, as our first go around. Then the question after that is, any kind of e-cigarette of any sort
right,
cannot be sold except in a smoking bar or smoke shop.
And you're saying what towns enacted that total ban on e-cigarettes at all, any even plain tobacco in retail?
At this point, just Somerville.
Just, and they're involved in a lawsuit right now.
They're involved in a lawsuit right now. If you're if that's something that you're interested in doing, what you can do is you can pass that policy and set the implementation date far enough out to see what happens with that lawsuit. So set the implementation date, at least 90 days out. And
Can revisit.
come 90 days, if you can change your mind and rescind the policy if you want to, or it can go into effect if you want it to.
I would be inclined to wait on that one myself. You can always revisit that. That
Now
one
that's,
would be-
I guess I just want to clarify something to make sure that you understand it. Somerville is the only one who's removed the tobacco e-cigarettes,
all even unflavored e-cigarettes.
unflavored
Right.
e-cigarettes.
Right.
But the way Needham and Ashland have voted, all flavored e-cigarettes would be removed on their implementation date. And it
Well,
would
that's what
leave
we
the
have.
tobacco ones in the convenience store. It's very confusing.
Say that part again? I thought we're looking to get rid of the flavored e-cigarettes in the retail stores
Right. The
and leave
The
the
kicker
plain
is
one.
Somerville is saying, but tobacco is a flavor in e-cigarettes,
Oh, yeah, okay, no,
okay?
right.
So they're removing all e-cigarettes, whether they have a flavor in them or not,
Right.
to adult-only stores.
Right.
They are the only community that's done that. The other two communities that have voted thus far have
Flavored.
voted all flavored,
Including mint and menthol.
mint, menthol, and wintergreen, you
Right,
got it,
yeah.
and it would leave the tobacco ones
Right,
in the convenience
Right, that's,
stores.
that,
So I
that's
just
what
wanted
we
to make
thought.
sure you
Yep,
understood the distinction.
yep, and that's the way it's written now, so.
Yeah, it's very confusing.
Okay, can we sort of take a straw vote here to just see what we would like to present to the public as what we're contemplating passing?
Mhm.
If we look at basically the yellowed materials here, which now is going to include menthol, mint, and wintergreen as a set of flavorings.
Assume we have
So
straw vote.
if we're talking about all flavored tobacco products or e-cigarettes that have those flavors in them, we're saying they've got to come out of convenience stores. They can only be sold in smoke shops or smoking bars.
Right,
with, just to be clear, if we say a distinguishes taste or aroma other than the taste or aroma of tobacco, which would include menthol, mint, and wintergreen, then cigarettes that have menthol, mint, and wintergreen in them would have to come out of the stores.
Right.
Okay.
Is that added
Correct,
to-
Salem's, Newport's
Yep.
would be moved out of the convenience stores and into an adult only.
Right. And that's what the other communities have done and have not got pushback yet as far as that goes, correct?
It's hard to tell what Somerville's being sued on. A lot of it, as I read it, is very procedural and strange. Didn't give the retailers enough notification. It was in the newspaper, it was advertised the way the city advertises all public hearings.
And just let me circle back one more time with all the facts and figures we're getting thrown out here. 146 communities have banned flavored tobaccos, correct?
If that's the number that's on your sheet, yeah.
Right, okay. And as part of that, mint and menthol are all 146 have mint? Okay,
No,
what number have,
only a few.
3 have taken the
Yeah.
vote.
Yeah.
Only one
Only one
has
has done it.
started.
right,
The second one will be Needham in July. There will probably be more right around July 1st, and there'll be quite a number between July and January, assuming that things get settled
and those,
favorably in Somerville.
and those towns that made those banned, that included the cigarettes that are also the same flavor, correct?
Yes, no
Okay.
distinguishing at all
Between
between
electronic, it's just
products.
tobacco products that are flavored like that.
So that means that if we didn't also ban electronic cigarettes across the board, then the convenient marts could still sell electronic cigarettes with mint, menthol, and wintergreen.
So let me just correct something you said. You said if you didn't ban electronic cigarettes.
Right.
If you didn't restrict them.
Okay, restrict,
Right, because you're not banning the sale of them, you're just restricting where they can be sold.
okay,
Okay? So if you didn't restrict them across the board, then,
and we
Yes,
didn't take
that's
and we didn't put the menthol, mint, and wintergreen flavoring as part of our restriction,
okay,
then convenient marts could still sell electronic cigarettes with mint, menthol, and wintergreen,
correct. And tobacco flavor, yeah.
and tobacco
Right.
flavor. Okay,
And the dealers, significant large quantities of cigarettes that are sold do have menthol, wintergreen, or mint flavoring added to them.
Well, the Jewel Mint was a very popular flavor
Now, I'm talking
until,
about tobacco products now.
as far as tobacco products,
Mention Newports, for example.
Newport, Salem's, in certain communities, they're sold at a much higher rate than in
Yeah.
other communities, but, women tend to prefer menthol more. Young women tend to prefer menthol more than,
So these are large, multi-billion dollar perhaps, commodities in the tobacco industry.
every cigarette brand out there is coming from a pretty large conglomerate.
All right, which is where the pushback is coming from when we start contemplating not being able to sell those in convenience stores. So, not a surprise, Somerville's having some difficulty. Yeah, it's a big city.
Yep.
Yeah.
It was the first. But they knew that a lawsuit would come, and they were ready to take it on. They feel that strongly. The mayor was in support of this, the school department was in support of it. The city feels that strongly that they're gonna prevail.
All right, well, if we take this in slices, the most obvious low-hanging fruit, if you want to go with that analogy, is if we're talking about flavored products, e-cigarettes, and if we're talking about that only, flavored e-cigarettes are coming out of all convenience stores, only being sold in, or they're not being sold anywhere, are they? They're gonna be sold in tobacco shops and,
And I think we called it flavored tobacco, not just e-cigarettes.
so
Correct.
define
Well,
flavored
well,
tobacco.
well, no, I mean, if we have flavored tobacco, now we start getting into some difficulty.
No, we don't get wintergreen, mint, and menthol with the flavored, unless we specify that.
Well, right now,
Well, we
we
have
left
to
it in
decide.
our list of flavors.
Right, that would have to come out. That was an error. If we're gonna not talk about wintergreen, mint, and methanol specifically, then that green sentence would come out and would have to strike it out of that definition, because otherwise we're including it.
Well, we're including it as part of the restriction. So if we leave it in as green, then it's not part of the restriction. In other words, if we're saying everything but, then
Leave it in
menthol.
as
Green.
right where you're seeing it there, as
Including
a
but not-
characterizing flavor, it is being exempt.
Right,
Right,
So it can
if we
stay in
ignore
the
the green
stores.
print for a short term and say any e-cigarette with any of these flavors cannot be sold in a convenience store, including menthol, wintergreen, and mint.
Only e-cigarettes, forget about the combustibles.
I'm just saying, let's do it a layer at a time. If we're talking e-cigarettes with any kind of flavoring, you cannot buy except in a smoke shop or
What about
a
chewing
smoking bar.
tobacco?
No community in Massachusetts has separated out the product type. So when they remove flavors, it's flavors of all products.
Yeah, but we're slicing up what flavoring we're talking about. That's the issue that I'm having here. Because as soon as you start saying tobacco products, now we can say tobacco products that include these flavors but exempting menthol, wintergreen, and mint. We can also say they may not be sold in convenience stores and other places. They only can be sold, those two places we talked about. We don't have any in town anyway. So.
But that doesn't mean that one of your convenience stores couldn't decide to change their business model and become an adult-only retail tobacco store. They would have to stop selling lottery, they would have to stop selling bread, milk, gum, things like that, but they
Right.
could sell vape products, they could sell all tobacco products.
Well, I understand. Certainly, we were creating perhaps, a demand for a product we don't have right now. So, could happen. So we have this one layer of e-cigarettes, flavored materials may not be there. Tobacco products, certain flavors may not be there. The ones that can be there, we could say, would be the mint, menthol, and the wintergreen. That would be another group that's restricted. And I think I'm hearing generally widespread approval for those two ideas. Candy-flavored cigarettes, essentially, and any flavoring of e-cigarettes cannot happen in a convenience store.
Candy flavors, well, the cigarette flavoring is already exempt federally.
Right.
So we don't have to spell it.
The candy-flavored cigarettes are,
Right,
but not cigars,
right.
Chewing tobacco.
So if we're saying flavored
Right.
Oh,
tobacco.
tobacco product, I'm
We're
sorry.
saying
I should've said
flavored tobacco products. So if we're banning
Flavored-
flavored tobacco products, we're banning cigars, chewing tobacco, e-cigarettes, everything except for menthol, mint, and wintergreen. Right.
Right.
Your definition of
Include,
tobacco
and what that means is that retail stores can sell wintergreen, mint, or menthol cigars, e-cigarettes,
No, not e-cigarettes.
or we're banning
Remember, the idea was e-cigarettes, anything with a
everything
flavoring is off.
e-cigarette.
E-cigarette, any flavor, gone,
Right, but including mint,
including menthol. You would
Okay.
put the green
Yeah.
stripe off
Okay.
that one.
all right.
For the tobacco products,
Those can
we're
stay.
leaving it on. But any
Is
other
that typical?
flavor-
Is that what?
Nobody's done it.
Really?
Yeah, that's what I'm saying. It sounds awful.
Wait a minute.
They don't, we haven't had a
That's-
community separate out products and say.
And that's my point. You're getting
Cigarettes
this.
aren't okay, but combustible cigarettes are.
Right. So you're making this a little more confusing by doing that.
Not just confusing,
Well, yeah, but making
flavor
it
is a
simple means you're
flavor.
adding more things you can buy in a convenience store. You're adding menthol, wintergreen, and mint e-cigarettes to the things you can buy in a convenience store if you don't do what I'm suggesting we do.
That's not a public health goal. A public health goal is to remove dangerous products
It's like you're making a loophole.
from situations where youth would have easy access to them.
So it's either we
Right.
ban mint, menthol, and wintergreen along with everything else, or we leave it in like most of the other people have done. So it's either we ban it and we go along with some of the three communities that have voted for that and see what happens, or we, which would be my take on it, we do what we initially did, get rid of the flavors as they're defined without the wintergreen, and get this enacted on the books and working, as opposed to having a
Alright.
lawsuit come at us
Alright,
and
well-
holding the whole thing up.
Okay, there are two ways to do it.
I think so.
Sounds like the popular way is to simply leave those three flavors in
For now,
for now.
and see what happens. always revisit it, you can always change our definition of flavor to include those, if it's so be it that the lawsuit works out in their favor.
Oh, did I do that?
These might be revisited.
Batteries are in, okay, thank you.
What do we think, people?
And this
No,
way
We
it
gotta put
gets
something
on-
out there to get public comment on.
Yeah, I agree.
Wanna go with that one?
Yeah,
So this gets it out there, gets it on the books probably quicker,
Yeah.
makes something better, and then we look at what happens in the future with the other lawsuits.
okay, so, just to summarize, we're going to leave under
The green stays in.
The green's gonna stay in.
Yeah.
Under characterizing flavor. Under e-cigarette, is the green staying in
Oh, see, where are we now?
as a definition?
What is an e-cigarette?
We could
Yeah,
define an
that-
e-cigarette, we're just not,
That's
Okay,
fine.
okay, and
Yeah.
then,
under the characterizing flavor though, we have to take out menthol and mint.
Right. Yeah, it can't be in both places. We're taking it out.
With the green place, it says other than the taste of mint, that we leave in.
oh, okay.
But
So we
below
have to take
that-
it out in the
It's gotta
yellow.
come out in
Yeah,
yellow.
below that, we're saying you can't have it, so it's
Yep.
contradictory.
All right.
E-cigarette is going to stay in, then if we go to G,
Mhm.
sale of flavored tobacco products and e-cigarettes prohibited under G. What page are you on? G, yeah. So, no person shall sell or distribute or cause to be sold e-cigarettes, as defined herein.
Mm.
See, we could have just gone with flavored tobacco products, which means
hold it, we're-
e-cigarettes that have,
Right.
Right, but that's, so all the other communities we're talking about have banned the flavored e-cigarette sales in the retail establishments, but they're still allowing plain tobacco sales of e-cigarettes in retail. Is that correct?
143 communities have restricted flavored e-cigarette sales to adult only.
Right.
With an exemption for menthol and wintergreen.
So,
3 communities
okay, that's fine, that's, stop right there.
taken off the exemption.
You're losing it there. So
But-
that green part, I believe,
The green
comes out.
part gets us into a small group.
That would come out under this current regulation.
Under stage
No,
one,
why would
it
it
comes
come out?
out.
Because we're still allowing the sale of plain tobacco and mint, wintergreen, and menthol in retail establishments.
yeah, but if we ban the sale of electronic cigarettes, then they can't.
Flavored, but we're not talking about doing that. All the other communities have banned the flavored, not necessarily the plain.
Flavored e-cigarettes?
Yes.
Okay,
So plain cigarettes are still okay. Plain
Okay.
e-cigarettes are still okay right now.
okay.
So
Okay, so
that
they took
green
out the
part-
whole definition of e-cigarettes then?
No,
Oh, it's a
no,
definition.
it's just the
It's not a
flavored part, that's
prohibition.
all. This part
We're
right
not-
here, the
We don't
green
need
part.
it if we're not,
Well,
why does it have to be in there?
Well, this
well,
part
you
here
have to define
does.
what an e-cigarette is.
But,
Because later on.
The
we're-
definition should still be in the definition
Right, that's fine.
section,
But-
but
but-
in G, the
G should be
green
struck.
part would come out.
Right.
but where else are we gonna talk about e-cigarettes in this?
Right here above it.
No.
Any
It says
flavored
Flavored
product.
e-cigarettes.
Any flavored tobacco product. No person shall sell or distribute or cause to be sold or distribute any flavored tobacco product. That includes, that's the e-cigarettes that are flavored. That's
Okay,
it,
okay.
right? Correct?
Okay, yep. And then, what about the pricing for the cigars, because that's in here too?
Is price in there?
I mean,
Yeah, we're gonna essentially ban the sale of cheap cigars and
No, you'd raise the price.
Yeah, is that something we want to consider under this?
well, I mean, like I said, let's talk about this in layers. We've already got one layer I think we decided on.
Okay, so we're okay with what we just talked about, right?
yes,
Okay. That gets us in line with the 143 other communities.
46 communities, okay. And then
So now we get the 2 other layers, blunt wraps
blunt wraps,
and pricing.
Since I didn't know what they were,
So you shouldn't be banning these because you don't know what they are.
just get rid of them.
okay, I think blunt wraps should go.
I had to look it up.
You might find some of the wrappers on your boat down in the,
Yeah, probably.
Where is the increase in price?
I tell you what, let's put it out there and see what kind of response we get.
What's that,
don't
the
have a
cigar
problem
pricing?
with it.
Do it.
I won't be here, but, yeah, I mean, it's the first I've heard of that. It seems odd, something you might wanna have to keep up with to change the prices as time goes by. I know
Not
you have a
really.
minimum.
I mean, Boston passed it a lot of years ago,
Yeah.
more than 6 or 7 years ago, and they haven't changed the price from two.
And this is $2.50 minimum townwide or just in retail stores?
Townwide.
Townwide, okay.
If we
Yeah, like
should
you
ever
said,
have
go
an
out there, I guess.
adult-only store, right? Okay.
That's, I've never heard that one.
There really hasn't been pushback in other communities from the retailers on it.
But has there been studies that actually helps?
Granted, Norfolk isn't Boston,
Right.
but Boston was the first community that did it. Then they did a study years later, and what they found was that kids were buying the cheap cigars less often because they didn't want to pay $2.50 for something that, you know, they used to buy for 50 cents or for something so little and insignificant.
Kind of see that point.
All right, let's put it out there.
Yeah, and we know youth are really price sensitive.
Yeah,
So that's the purpose, and that's why we tax cigarettes.
Yeah.
And so
can see that.
flavored
Instead of
cigars are
paying
like
that much,
initiation.
If they're gonna
Yeah,
spend
so that's
$1
the
and
purpose of
change
it.
on a cigar, I
Yeah.
can see that being an issue.
All right, so the cheap cigars are basically nowhere. Not even in the,
Right.
in the tobacco shop, you can't buy a cheap cigar anymore.
Can't buy anything under
$2.50
if you put in that policy.
There are a few old timers in the audience here like me who have a little issue with that.
Well, just-
Not that
just
I've
go
ever
to-
smoked one in my life, but
You'll have to go
I
to
know
a
people who have.
Again, for the few old timers that would be inconvenienced and have to pay the extra money, you're probably stopping how many youth from initiation?
First of all, the youths
with-
are not even gonna be in the stores we're talking about. That's the whole point here. I mean, this could come
Yeah,
up, this
I mean,
could be
that's-
another one of these
it's a little-
restrictions.
I know, it doesn't, that's the only thing I said, it doesn't, even adult-only tobacco stores can't sell them for less than $2.50.
Right.
So I do have a little issue with that, I guess.
Well,
but-
it
A point too is tobacco cigars are deadly, so this stuff shouldn't be cheap. $2.50 is still pretty cheap for something like that. Just remember, cigars are very deadly.
I mean, the purpose of the cigarette tax, and Massachusetts has one of the highest cigarette taxes in the country, $3.51 right now, and I believe we're talking about maybe raising it. The purpose of that is not to put more money necessarily in the state's general fund. The purpose of that is
Yeah,
to
deterrent.
encourage
All right.
adult smokers
You know
to
what?
quit.
I have no idea what a cigar could cost. Maybe $2.50 is a reasonable number. I'm gonna put it in.
How many communities have enacted that?
The cigars, you've got, we passed
Got a
one
long
out
list
to
here.
you, but
No, did you give, I'm sorry.
Yeah, we got one.
174.
174?
174 communities, 70% of the state population.
All right, leave it on the
Your
list.
neighbors include Dedham, Franklin, Medfield, Medway. I can go on and on.
All right.
Okay, that's fine, no, we,
Do we need to make a motion here? that-
Well,
no, we're not
well,
voting on anything.
we need to be able to say, this is what we're contemplating doing so we can send it out for
Right.
public opinion. So we do need
I'm in
to
favor
make
of-
agreements.
Yeah, I don't think we need
Or-
to vote on this, though.
No, not to vote on this actual
but even to
regulation, but
put it
for
out
it to
there.
go out there, to be, for, yes,
Public comment.
For public comment?
yes.
Yeah.
Okay.
That's also.
All right, so
public
what are we
comment.
doing about the blunt wraps?
The blunt
We're
wrap
saying,
should stay
forget
in
about
there.
Yeah, blunt is staying in there, too.
They're going the
I mean, they're
the way
in
of the
here.
$2.50 cigar. man.
Prohibition of the
Right,
sale
right.
of blunt wraps.
Yes.
They can't even be expensive blunt wraps, though.
So once you folks have a draft that you think you're happy with, then you would have a public hearing.
Right.
Right.
And you could take comments up until the public hearing date or a week after the
Right.
public
Yeah,
hearing date.
that part we get. That
We've
part we know,
been
yeah.
down this road before and other
Yeah.
stuff, so,
I
all right.
think we've looked at it long enough. We should
Yeah.
just,
So, do you wanna schedule a public hearing for the next Board of Health meeting?
uh-huh,
yes.
yes.
So let me get this clear, at the moment, the only thing that we are
from the yellow? Yeah.
I can't
the-
see it from
That's
here.
coming out from the yellow for now. We can always put it back in.
Was that,
Right
which
now
one?
it's coming out.
Yeah, the exemption comes out, yeah.
Right under characterizing
Yep,
flavor?
yep. 1, 2, 3, 4 sentence down, yeah. Yep. That comes out, and then under G, second sentence, everything after the first.
Okay, so G, second sentence.
G second sentence is
where
gone
it
for now.
says-
Okay.
No person.
Person shall sell or distribute.
So after the first
E-cigarettes.
sentence, after the first period, everything comes out.
Do you want that whole, the whole green section
Mhm.
deleted?
Yeah.
Mhm.
Yep.
For now, the whole green section goes on page 9. Okay. Everything else, I guess, stays in.
Where's the
Right,
price?
we've discussed it.
And the price is going in, the 250 is going in.
The 250 goes in.
Under what? J, we don't have it in there yet, right? J, our package sales. Is that in there?
All right, we got it.
See, here, I got the. This is my, you want my copies?
So you gotta add that in someplace, right?
Which one?
The price of the cigars?
So Jeff, now I'm
That's
taking.
the top of page 9 on
Oh,
my
is
list.
it, you have it?
Took that out.
Oh, I'm sorry, yeah, my
Was there
bad.
anything else?
I think everything else stays in.
Yep, everything else stays in.
Some of this is actually already in.
Yep, yeah, I didn't know that
The
was in there.
non-colored versions. So we're just adding all the yellow material.
Right.
And we didn't add the green on page 9 at this stage.
The only thing that's a little odd, I guess it can stay in, is this whole explanation of how we get there, that's in the regulation.
I can make them. I'll send them to you.
The stating of facts that, why are we getting there?
Whereases?
Yeah.
There's a lot of whereases.
Yeah.
Well, you know what?
Well,
it
whereas
should be.
they're gonna change.
Well,
And
yeah.
the fines went up, by the way. I don't know
Well,
if
we don't
you,
need to define everything.
no, the fines went up.
Oh, no, I'm just saying this, it's almost a statement of facts of why we're doing this. It just seems a little overboard,
It's all right.
but it's
That's
not gonna
okay.
hurt anything, just
No.
that these statistics are gonna change over time.
Anybody asks
Right.
why? We got pages of reasons.
Refer to
Right,
section A.
All right,
Okay.
so we okay on what we're doing here? All right, when we gonna have a public hearing on this?
I have our tentative date. We're thinking if we could set a regular schedule. Fran and I were talking today, the third Tuesday of each month,
Third Tuesday.
which next month would be May 21st.
I can't make it.
Boy.
I got a date with a 40-foot catamaran.
All right, when's the
Uh,
date with the 40-foot catamaran?
That's on the 21st.
Oh, what's the month? We have to give a month well, how much notice do you have to give in the paper?
Usually, each town has their own policy, but I think most towns usually advertise it twice.
Typically, we just do it once. Usually,
If that's what was done, that's fine.
Yeah, for, I think, Board of Health we do.
Yeah.
We do it once, typically like a month prior to.
21 days.
And then we'll send it out to all of
I
our
can-
licensed tobacco retailers. Send a
You
copy.
and Eileen can
yeah,
take
send
care
a
of it.
copy with the cover letter, send them a copy of the notice of hearing. And then I'll post this on the town website.
So,
Is there any possibility of the day before?
sure.
Wait a sec, no.
Here, here's the calendar.
Yeah, I've
You
got it
got
up
it
here
in your
too.
head? You got it up
Well,
there.
only because I've got two things happening back to back. One is going to BVI, one is my daughter's graduating from college.
Yes, those are all important.
And so that wipes out the weekend, so it's got to back up even before that. Can we
What
get-
about what?
I was going to say, what about the week before?
The 14th is town meeting,
Yeah.
so that's not
Right,
gonna
that
work.
doesn't give me enough time to really
Right.
advertise.
Well, then let's, I was gonna say, let's bounce ahead a couple of weeks.
Bounce it ahead?
I mean, bounce it back or forward.
Well,
So
today's
later.
the-
When do you do
Later.
back? When do you do back?
Well, that depends. Optimistically, it's gonna take about 2 weeks to go from there to here.
We would be sending on a search party if you weren't back.
No, Virgin Islands. In a sailboat. Takes a while to get there. Well, it should be about 2 weeks coming north.
So if we
So
do,
2 weeks after that would be what?
after the
June-
21st is June 4th?
June 4th. How about giving 1 week of weather uncertainty? How about the week after that?
June 11th.
June 11th? Okay.
Another night that week would be fine.
Well, I'm generally fine any other night myself.
How's that work for your future member?
I don't know.
I work Wednesday night.
You work Wednesday nights. How do Thursdays or Mondays work?
Monday's
Thursday.
a bad night?
No, that's fine.
I mean, Monday, is it a good night? Be the June 10th?
June 10th.
June 10th, all right. Let's go for June 10th. All right,
So
that'll
we're
give us
not
plenty
gonna
of time
have
to
a
get a lot of
meeting
comments.
in June 10th,
All right.
okay.
Thank you, ladies,
Thank you so
for
much.
all of your sage advice and your time.
Yes.
Your patience.
Yeah.
And walking us
You
through this,
Repeat many statistics.
yeah.
That was 100 and what towns? Yeah, how many towns? All right, do you guys want a motion then? Is that looking for something to make it official, to changes or not?
Well,
I don't think you need it yet.
we're not taking a vote on anything.
No.
We're just putting out for comments.
For comments, right.
I think we're okay.
Okay. We all, okay.
All right, it's a little after 7:30. But the second item on our agenda tonight, 17 Lawrence Street Public Involvement Plan and other related matters.
Update of where we're at.
I wanted to just convey something that happened a couple weeks ago that I think you all know about, many of you do, but it actually happened in between Board of Health meetings. So what happened, to explain to everybody, is I got a call from a member of the planning board concerning a subdivision going in up on Lawrence Street that I think most of you know about, Cranberry Heights. And the proximity of that subdivision to a number of your houses, and the proposal that to build that subdivision is going to require some pretty serious changes of grade, including blasting. And this planning board member and I shared concerns that we both had over what might that be doing to, for example, people's private wells. And so I dictated a letter as a result of that, which Betsy sent along to the planning board, asking that as a part of their process for permitting that subdivision, that the applicant be required to meet with the Board of Health before any site work was done. And the purpose of the meeting was to discuss the need for pre-construction testing of people's water supplies, especially in the perimeter closest to the proposed new subdivision. The planning board apparently went along with that request, and it was actually included in their conditions. And it was shortly thereafter that the owner, not the owner actually, but the proposer of the subdivision basically said, no, thank you, and walked. So we didn't actually do anything except write a little bitty letter. And I don't know whether it was the straw that broke the camel's back or what it was, but, or maybe it was just a convenient excuse. But the bottom line is that subdivision right now is not going anywhere. So just to explain what happened, I was a little surprised when I heard from the planning board that everything was off the table, which actually was in some ways a little too bad in one respect, and that is there was a plan to essentially, as I think you know, essentially put town water around the entire area, which, you know, I'm not sure what you're feeling like about the water supply you have for your house, but it's nice to have a backup. And town water's pretty good.
Well, hydrants are the thing that we need up there.
And there's water
We've had a
protection.
A fire in our house.
Well, you raise a good point. It's not only water supply, it's water, it's fire
I'm sorry,
protection.
I'm
So anyway, so that's what was going on. So are there other things we need to get caught up on? Would anybody from the community want to, Yes.
Dave Diamond, 3 Brett's Farm Road.
welcome?
I wanted to just give you a handout. It's just, by the way, thank you during the Bruins game with all people.
Do you have an update?
Hey, Game 7, say they're a dime a
Just
dozen.
need to remind you. Actually, that's-
Bruins?
Black
Thank
and
you.
white ones. So, based on what you just said, which was, unfortunately, I couldn't make that meeting, but I did watch it. The planning board wanted what you just said. The letter and your support is very helpful. So, I was just gonna read this to everyone. It's just
All right.
a request.
Grab a microphone so everybody hears
Yeah,
at
I
home
was
too.
just gonna sit down here. so
Yeah,
I
yeah,
could get
right.
some camera time.
Oh, hey, man, go for it.
Dave, I want your camera time.
I think this is a pretty easy request, and we'd had some neighbors and some of the people here sign it. But what it comes down to is, and I'll just read through it, we're calling upon the board for your help to request a meeting with the applicant. I'm not sure if the applicant now, it's Mr. DePlaso, who commissioned the testing. And he's listed as the other person on the PIP site, that's the petitioners. We want him to come before you in the next 21 days and present the entirety of the environmental sampling data taken in 2019. This data is important to the town and nearby residents to determine the risks to human health and environment. The site's been documented as having the following levels and more, and this just cites 3 areas of concern, the chemicals of concern. I do have the map there too, which we'll be sure to get you digitally. But I think it's important that you just have, it's not a great picture because you can't really see where the river is, but the PCBs, as were discussed at the last Board of Health meeting, it was very helpful to have Paul here talking about those two, but 25.2 parts per million, and that's at the carbonizer trench soil sample 8. And then cadmium at 86.4 parts per million, that's at carbonized lagoon soil sample 6. Carbonized 6, you'd heard me speak about a number of times, that's 79 parts per million at carbonized lagoon soil sample 11. And based on the data that's available, and I've presented some papers on some of these things, we feel it's likely, we don't have all the data, we feel it's likely that there could be higher PCB levels that could pose an imminent hazard, especially when the Lawrence Street Bridge reopens with a recreational aspect of the Cantilever Walkway, and as you know, folks do fish down on that dam. So we're asking that the Board of Health send a letter to the ZBA with a request that no comprehensive permit be issued until the full nature and extent of the contamination is known and the PCB levels meet the S1 requirements for Zone 2. So I think this is would be helpful to us because we saw the letter you sent to the planning board about the wells, and so the idea would be, also to send it to the ZBA. The ZBA meetings, we haven't had them now in a couple of months. They've been postponed, and things have changed there because it appears that the applicant for the ZBA permit is no longer has a binding purchase sales agreement. So,
Oh, really?
yeah, so that's, and that's what, that's right, correct. So, you know, just one other thing it's important that leads into that is the PIP group made a request on March 18th to Steve Verte, who's the LSP of record at the time, to present a status update for the PIP, with a PIP meeting with the 2019 sampling results. And as you know, lead petitioners, we're entitled to have that update. Quite a bit has changed, but he resigned shortly thereafter, 2 weeks after, on April 1st, as you know from the last meeting where Weston Sampson, where Paul presented, and he did so without a response to that request. Now, Buckley and Mann has retained a lawyer from Massey and Massey, Joanna Hilvert, and she replied to the petitioners on April 9th, 2019, but did not release the test results either. So we're asking for, I think, for your support and helping us get complete transparency disclosure in driving this access to protect the health of the residents in the surrounding area and those who consume water from the Gold Street Well aquifer, which, according to Google Earth, is approximately 3,500 yards downstream from the PCB sample of 25.5. And we do have the Google Earth completely built-out database and model with all the test results going back actually to 2012, and then a bunch of scanned results that came out before that. So, you know, what we're thinking here is that with the PCB level being so high, and the type of PCBs from what we've heard from the LSP that I've retained, being so unusual, that there's something there that needs to be actionable. Also, just another, so that's a lot to digest. Maybe we can discuss that, and then be one other couple of questions we might want to ask.
There's a lot of data that was collected by the folks working for Tom de Placido. Where does that data live now?
It's in an enclave somewhere. It's not accessible to us. And I think we could wait there. I think Paul mentioned this. There is a 120 days reporting from the time that the test results. And just because of the one area with that, the chromium-6, you've heard quite a bit about, and let's not look here, let's look around. Those are results that haven't been released. Some of these numbers, carbonized goon soil sample 11, which is the chromium, and the cadmium, I think, is in 3. Sandra, is that correct?
Carbonized goon soil sample 6.
6. Okay, so 6 is about 15 feet from the river. A carbonized lagoon soil sample 10, which is just, we don't have that information, for instance. That's less than it's less than a yard from the river. And you can't see it on this picture, but we've got some recent drone flyovers where you can see that there's actually, from the carbonized lagoon, there's a land bridge of about 1.5 feet, and there's a breach underneath that. So the carbonized lagoon water could, and potentially some of these could be flowing into the river. That's hence the mention of the town well. So Tom, I think to answer your question, to summarize, the data's there, it's been analyzed, we don't have access to it as the petitioners, and there's been kind of a, with the resignation, it doesn't sound to me, and we're not experts in this, but it doesn't sound to me like Mr. Verte, Steve Verte from Mabit, is required to release them. So it's a little bit of an unknown for us, and we need your help.
So who has to report within 120 days to DEP?
DEP, based on what I saw on on the last month's meeting, it would be those who own the sampling data, and I would assume that that is the applicant, Tom de Placido. So, does that sound right, or is it Mabit, or?
It's the owner of the land, and if he doesn't do it, then it goes to the LSP.
Yeah, so this is confusing for us, to say the least.
Yeah.
And we've read and looked on some things, and I think it's hard because we don't have Weston Sampson here. We did get their statements of work and their invoices and things. It seems like things are pretty evened out with the work that's been done, and they're still on contract with the town, but there's no work active with Weston and Sampson.
They can provide us with
We-
advice in terms of what the,
Yeah.
which
That's
LSP
what
is
they-
supposed to be reporting what data. I mean, they would have that.
We should get
Yeah,
information from them regarding this resignation and what we do next. And I think
Yeah.
there is definitely, if there's something going forward, we should definitely send a letter that at least freezes everything, and we can reference this
That'd be
saying,
great.
we have to know what's going on. This is kind of an unusual situation. Their LSP has resigned. We need to kind of pause and figure out what we're doing here.
send a letter to whom? To the zoning board.
Right.
Well,
But
yeah, at
it-
the same time, we need to talk to,
And we have to talk to our peer review consultants at Weston and Sampson,
Weston and
see
Sampson.
what we have to do next.
So
for
maybe we
this.
should talk to them first, and then
Yeah.
they've
Well, I don't know
given
where
us
we are in the
advice.
zoning process. I don't want to miss anything, so we need to get something in front of them saying we're trying to figure out what's going on.
When's the next zoning board? May something.
May
Meeting.
22nd.
May 22nd?
Just for Abbeville, there are others.
So we have time
But that's
to
the next
speak.
meeting. I would suggest getting them a letter in front of them, just saying we're looking into this. We got to figure out what's going on before you move forward.
The concern is that it's been a while, and a lot of things have changed, and that they might move forward with a
Right.
comprehensive permit. It's been very open process. I mean, we've been able to see that permit be developed and see the redlining of it, so that that group and the attorney representing that has been helpful. But so much has changed, since then with, with Mabbitt resigning and
Yeah,
things.
and we
so-
saw it not long ago where things moved forward, but we didn't get a chance to comment on it. And I would hate to see that happen again in this case, so I just think a letter to them, letting them know that
well,
would
at
be
the same time, we need
prudent.
to talk to
Yeah.
Yeah,
Tom
absolutely.
Steiner, though, about getting a hold of the folks at our LSP to
Mhm.
find out what their advice is for us as well as for these folks. Do you have your own LSP?
I actually have retained one, yeah.
Well, I mean, that's a good question to ask, is, how does this all work in LSP land when
Well,
we have one person retiring?
Yeah, it's really tricky, and I think you've heard, this may have been on the last meeting, but it's really tricky because this is a self-regulated body, and there's a board behind it. And from the take that I had from watching what Paul talked about from Weston Sampson,
Mhm.
who's your LSP, is that whoever's responsible for doing the test and having the results is also responsible for the reporting.
Right.
And so it doesn't strike me from what I know that the LSPs will step in front of others to report results that they didn't take. So that's about, if you go back and kind of watch that segment where Paul talked. One thing I do know, which I think is a very positive thing for the town and for those concerned and those who have, well water and even town water, is that my understanding is that PCBs become an EPA issue. And when the EPA gets involved, so another thing we wanted to ask is if we can get you engaged with a PCB expert for the Northeast from the EPA and introduce you through email as soon as we have access to all the results, not just this one. If we don't get access to all the results, we would take this result and bring it forward to the EPA.
Mhm.
So anyway, I think it should be concurrent then. We have to talk to Weston and Sampson, let them know what happened, let them know,
I think
they
they
might
probably
need a
already do.
revised scope of work, revised proposal. There could be that involved, and then the letter has to go to ZBA letting them know that we are doing that and that they shouldn't really move forward until we can get our arms around what's going on here.
On top of this, I have a question that I think maybe some folks around the table know way better than those of us up here do, and that is De Placido basically extracting himself from this? Or is he staying in?
I mean,
Well, there's still permitting, so.
I think Sandy has a letter from
All right.
Actually,
the man's attorney.
yeah, this was, you're CC'd on it, but here's a copy of it. Did you pass around the letter to them? So this is the letter that she
Is that in
sent
here?
back to me.
All right.
You can just scan it, but basically she said the history, they no longer have the purchase and sale, and sorry, I can't give you test results now, but I don't know why she can't. I mean,
Yeah,
it's
that
a
just
P-
could
yeah.
be, you know, again, they can renew that or anything else for the purchase and sale, how they feel, but that just might be a.
She
Ah.
doesn't have the purchase and sale. Who's she?
Oh,
She's the
sorry.
lawyer for the man down.
I think I mentioned that.
This is Joanna.
Yes,
Hilbert.
Joanna Hilbert.
Uh,
So there is some intent in the last two paragraphs
Oh,
you
yeah,
can
yeah,
see
I'm looking
there.
at that.
So I,
Bring the site back under contract, so development can't proceed forthwith. Uh-huh.
Right, so saying that can be renewed pretty easily, the P&S.
and to be, you know, to be candid and looking at this whole thing come together over the last 2 years, however long it's been, you know, there's a lot of things in play. There's a gravel operation and some activism around that, obviously, is development, and the ZBA's done a nice job working on density and being collaborative with it, but the showstopper is this toxic waste. And that is independent of the development. That's something for the whole town to consider. I think the fact that you're working on, you know, you can work with Weston Sampson. Weston Sampson represents the ZBA. It's helpful to kind of make that the central issue and not dilute it too much. And this is me speaking. Not dilute it too much with the big picture of the development and permits. I think that's where we should focus. Not to say that we shouldn't focus on the other things in the context of the ZBA. But
No,
don't wanna burden
absolutely.
you with all those things. It is good, very important context for you to have, though.
Yeah, we talked about in the first meeting, we've never encountered this type of
Absolutely.
issue. So to kind of downplay it would be a mistake,
Yeah.
and that's why I was did, but I
You know, we
totally
got,
enforced of sending that letter and kind of pausing everything. Let's take a step back, make sure we do this correctly.
yeah. And we have a lot of information and a lot of open book stuff. We have, you know, MySP has provided us with some U.S. Department of Agriculture flyovers that go back to 61 and 68.
Mhm.
You can see some discrepancies about the development of the site, about the lagoons and things. They are interconnected with a trench and things. So there's a lot of material back there that can show you the complexity. I don't know if you've had the opportunity to walk some of these areas, but we have, you know, a couple hours of good drone, high quality drone, and you can footage, and you can actually see the proximity to the river of some of these things. You can see how things are interconnected between the end of the tail race that goes into the river and lagoon number 3. So, you know.
You can look over.
Oh, okay. So here we go. We get oriented here. I think it's just helpful for you. So it's actually, Lagoon 3, actually you can see, there's a little flume right here, an entrance in. And Lagoon 1 is the one adjacent, and it's part of the AUL. The rest is voluntary. So this is an area in here that was tested. In here, there's a bunch of dredging pits that was, some of it's tested. I don't want to talk about the foundations now, but, you know, the drones fly over show commingling of the test areas with actually work and piles and excavators on the foundation. That's a real issue. But the carbonizer lagoon in here, you can actually see a very thin area. That was the area I was talking about. Cadmium. This is the backflow trench right here. So this would be PCB, so we know right there. And I'm trying to think. Trench here, Sandra,
Yeah.
is the chromium, and this is an active flow, and this is
Well,
an
there's
active
even higher
flow.
chromium in the lagoon area.
Yeah, so that's 11, is right here. So we have scientific research. Here's my point. We have an open book. There's a lot of data. Eric Diamond's here. He's developed a Google Earth model, dynamic. You can pull up all the things, clicks, drops. And there's you know, a lot of concern about esophageal cancer, stomach cancer, bladder cancer. Things that are directly linked. If you do a reverse risk analysis, directly linked. If you look at those, you can do a backtrack to these chemicals. And something that rings in my ear is when at one of our pit meetings, it was said, I don't know an LSP in Massachusetts that would test further than 79 for chromium 6. That's not a direct quote, but that's pretty much, which was infuriating, because you could go over 5 feet or 10 feet or 20 feet and find more of it. So, got a lot off my chest tonight. I think here's the request, and I'll leave it at that.
Pretty straightforward.
Well, I think it is too.
Great. Thank you.
Thanks for your time.
So. This is Sandy's.
Thank you, Sandy.
Thank you.
They have that, yep.
I saw
I've
it.
seen it, though.
I saw it.
Maybe we have it.
Got it.
Yeah, I saw it.
Is it, where is it?
No, it's
Not in your
online.
packet. I emailed it to you.
Yeah, it's in our email.
I'm not getting this email. You didn't get it?
Did, I'm,
Sending it to both of them, sending it to
I
both.
saw it.
I might have seen
You
it.
saw it?
I saw that letter.
All right.
Did, that before vacation or after
No, it was
vacation?
before. That would have been, April 11th, so probably the Thursday before I left for vacation.
Okay.
We just have to talk to Weston Sampson, reevaluate the scope, see if anything has changed. If they have to come up with a new scope of work, a new pricing, and then just get a letter to zoning board saying things have changed. We need to reevaluate where we're at, what our responsibilities are. We would like to hold off what you can until we get answers from our peer review consultant. Just hold off as far as moving this permit forward, you know.
But
Well, right.
I guess I'm,
Is there any activity even happening at the ZBA right now?
They have a meeting coming up.
All right, but,
At Abbeville meeting.
but what is the applicant actually doing?
He's renegotiating with the Mann family.
Right.
to buy the land.
So I'm sure a comprehensive permit would make it more incentive for him to move forward.
She's a microphone, so we get it.
Please identify, and then you can use the microphone, please.
Peg Bedard, 28 Lawrence Street. Sorry about that. I think if you had a comprehensive permit, it would give more incentive for both parties to move forward with a purchase and sale. And I think if you put this letter forward, it gives us more protection. I mean, you were talking a little bit about the other site and the blasting. If there's blasting on this site, wouldn't we be concerned about the Gold Street well? Couldn't that potentially get contaminated? And that's town-wide, that's not just our little part of Norfolk.
but what,
Right.
I'm not clear on what they're requesting is for us to have someone address these levels of contamination, the PCB. Who's looking at it right now? Because we don't know who owns it? The data?
Family still owns it. They have not replaced the LSP. So essentially, this is a
Yeah.
tip site, a tier 2 site with no LSP.
Use your mic. So
They
Well,
have-
well, right before, when, David Marshall, 26 Lawrence Street, when Tom DePlacido was at the last ZBA meeting, he was doing the enclave, and they quietly had said, the ZBA guys had told Tom and his lawyer that on the May 22nd meeting, he needs to prove site control of Abbeville. They had said that. It's on the video. I went back and looked at it too. He has to prove site control. I looked up what that meant. That meant basically in a sense of purchase and sale. He has to come back on May 22nd and prove that's what they wanted from him about Abbeville because they had pushed it.
So our letter can just simply say as far as
I
if
don't know.
this is gonna move forward, or if you're going to move forward, or new permit, whatever, we would like this looked at before it moves forward. Or is reevaluated, anything else like that, just some sort of caveat
We
in
already
front.
have that agreement with ZBA, but they would look toward us for any, questions.
Can't hurt
that
to
they
get it
have.
out there again, because I guess sometimes these things slip through the cracks. This is a new change, just so, I know everyone's aware of it, but just so we're on record saying we realize a change has happened before anything else potentially does happen. Let's make sure this is addressed.
But I think what I'm hearing is that someone has to report within 120 days of, and I forget the date, when the testing was done. Do we have the date? Does anybody?
Well, we know the town knew about the PCBs around February 6th, so I assume that
I think-
Mabit also knew on February 6th. So 120 days from February 6th is probably a conservative number. That would be June 6th.
So can I just finish? So by 120 days, someone has to report. But you folks are asking us to have somebody look into this so that this gets brought to, so you know that someone is addressing this right now. Is that what you're saying? That
No,
some-
we would like, so there were more than just 5 samples. Our LSP that worked for the town did 5 split samples. 2 were tested for PCBs, and both had PCB levels.
Right.
One of the levels was 25.2. There are numerous other tests where we would like to see the results that were taken in January by Mabit, who was doing response actions for Mr. DePlacido, for the applicant, as an other person. He didn't own the land. So when he resigned, he's supposed to file a letter, which he did with the DEP. Mr. Viteri sent a letter of resignation to the DEP.
Yep, we saw that.
I believe he's also supposed to file a report summary, and I'm trying to find out how many days does he have to do that. And I have a letter to the DEP right now and trying to find out when is he going to file that and what is going to be included. Is it going to be all the test data, or is it just going to be reportable concentrations? We want to see all the test data. We think it's good for the town to know what's over there, and it's good to know where the locations are of the PCBs.
And that can just be another letter to Weston and Sampson, just asking how you proceed with this. If this guy has resigned, what do we need? What should be done? What do we need to know?
Who's the contact? Is it the town planner? Who's interacting with Paul?
Yeah, Rich.
Okay, it's Rich. Tomorrow, is Rich around? Would you ask him to contact Paul and try to get an answer to this question? Because he's an LSP, he must know what the rules are. For data which is now, it's got to been taken, the samples must have been taken sometime in January. Analyzed late January, reported early February. When do we get a chance to see all that data? Now, granted, it was bought and paid for by Tom DePlacido, but
If
it's all
reportable.
part of a review process and evaluation process that I think certainly you folks are entitled to see.
If it's at reportable concentrations, it has to be reported by the LSP, so.
Right.
But we don't want just that one number.
Yeah.
That's the point. There were many locations.
Was part of the PIP process, because you know more about that, do you get a chance to see a lot of the data or some of the data?
Well, I asked for a status update meeting to Mr. Viteri before he resigned to see all the data, and then he resigned without answering me. So I think we are allowed to ask for a meeting whenever we feel it's necessary, and we felt it was necessary.
All right, well, I think Paul would be the person who would have some thoughts on this.
Yeah.
Or the fellow who works with Paul. I
Yeah,
forget
well,
his name.
they gotta direct
Well, I
us on
think
this.
Paul's is the
Frank.
lead LSP on this now.
Yeah,
All right,
Frank was the other guy.
yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, I mean, the 25 ppm of PCBs kind of just jumped out of almost nowhere. I don't think we'd seen that before in any sample that I'm familiar with. Do you have other data on that?
No, I just want to bring up the point, that's a high PCB amount. The reporting structure is 120 days if something's not an emergency. Does that number make this more of an emergency? And something that should be reported sooner or quicker to the DEP? I think that's what I'm thinking here.
Well, that's what Weston Sampson has to tell us. I don't think anyone sitting up here knows the answer to that.
And let me add one little part to that, and that is, a lot has to do with the fact that that concentration of PCBs didn't somehow land there sometime in the last couple of months. It was more like some decades ago. And so I think that is where there's some distinction between actionable and how soon the action has to be taken. Like, for example, to stop it from happening, well, it's already happened. So now the question is, what do we do about it? And I think that's a whole different kind of reporting strategy and urgency that's associated with the process.
Although I would submit, even if it's old, it's still going into the water system.
We don't know.
It hasn't shown up yet, that's the problem. That we know, exactly, right. So that's what I'm saying, we need some direction from Weston. and
So,
Sampson.
Dave Diamond again. Just one thing, if we go way back in some of the documents, you will find some testing that's been done for PCBs. It was a very interesting process, very unorthodox. It was actually a letter from Richard Mann to, I think, Robert Swanson, who is the person from the original site cleanup professional, with handwritten pictures. It basically says something, and don't quote me on this, but we've got 18 inches of dirt from these locations. Where do you want me to send them? And then there was testing done for PCBs on that. I would like to send that to you. It's been of great interest as to why were we looking for PCBs, why were they hand-drawn by the actual property owner, so we can get you that. It's in some documents, some of the very, very first documents. So this was known about. This material did surface during the golf course study. That information is across the street in the files there, so I can get you a copy of that.
So you're saying there were samples taken as a result of some earlier time that
Some earlier time,
showed-
correct. There's no chain of
these-
custody for what we can find.
Yeah.
So,
Do you have the results, what the results were?
yeah, there's some handwritten results we can get you to. So here's my point. The point on that is, I think what you said, Tom, this didn't just happen. The thing that's very interesting that I haven't heard anything on, and Paul did talk about it last meeting, is there's referred to as the carbonizer process, the carbonizer process. We think these came. I counted 20 things in there. This is not typically something you see out of a carbonizer process. This is something, a high-grade concentration, military-grade, type of material, and there's no sense that it's there. So that makes it of even greater concern, particularly when the town's LSP and also, Mabit weighed in and said, we don't believe we should test underneath this tarp, this sealed landfill. So just an observation. Summary, we do have some data we can get you. I think you'd find it interesting. The other one is, this goes way back. I'm not going to suggest that, but if you go look at the type of chemical, it doesn't make sense for us there. And I'm no expert, I'm not speaking in professional capacity, but it's just unusual that you'd associate with a carbonizer process. So.
All right, so in terms of the original requests of us, certainly getting data is the thing that we all would like to have happen, and sooner rather than later. We can't operate as a board unless we have information to go on. And right now, we're kind of guessing as to what, in addition to those numbers that we did see, what about the other data that's behind all that? Because that was only a small cut of the number of samples that were taken by the other group. Certainly contacting the ZBA to let them know that, yeah, we're still here, and we're still interested in finding out what's going on up there. Happy to do that.
So I have one more concern that might, elevate this. So, Lawrence Street is going to open hopefully in the next month. We're hoping. But that is going to have a cantilevered walkway, which people will gather on and maybe fish from. And that could raise this PCB level to an imminent hazard with access back onto the dam. Kids will be walking around again, and you have PCB levels very close, within 500 feet of that walkway. So talk to Mr. McKinley and see if opening that road makes this imminent hazard.
You're
He would
worried
have
about
to-
foot traffic because of the road coming around and meandering down toward the Carbonizer Lagoon?
Yeah, people do. They walk around, they go to the dam, they walk all the way around the backside,
property now,
that
isn't it?
straight run.
They walk dogs, kids hang around there.
You know, it probably should be fenced, that part should be fenced off, or, you know, somebody has to do some investigating and determine what are the risks. But we need more data, too, to know where are the PCBs.
Yeah, that kind of defines what the scope of the problem actually is. Yeah. Are there other things people would like to share tonight?
Goes on.
Yeah, except thank you for taking out, dealing with the other thing with the wells and so
Well, it didn't have the intended consequence, but I wasn't trying to stop anything. But that's kind of what happened.
Yeah, when there was the appropriate thing to do, we appreciate it.
You're welcome. That's good. You get paid the big bucks to do that kind of stuff. Yeah.
Well, will you send the same letter to the applicant for Abbeville? He wants to remove all that earth and black.
Yeah, now, remember, this was all because we knew that if this was gonna happen, there was gonna be some serious blasting which could have a major impact on, you know, bedrock. Now,
no
all along,
anticipated-
DePlasto's been saying, no,
No
we're just
blast.
taking gravel. So, if that changed, obviously, yeah, then the same thing applies. Definitely does. All right. Well, thank you all.
Thank you. That doesn't sound very good.
All right.
Time's at 9 o'clock.
This one, our to-do list for,
Minutes? None.
Minutes.
That was just the,
The newest stuff?
Correspondence?
Thank you.
oh, I'm sorry, I didn't mean to throw that out.
That's all right.
No updates.
Just one set of minutes in here.
Don't do an update.
And we approved them the last
Yes.
meeting.
I think most of the new business can probably wait till your next meeting.
any questions?
She's like, what am I signing?
Well, no.
I pay attention, my husband's an associate member of the planning board, so he's one of the we talk about a lot of this at dinner. I'm familiar with a lot of that, and Fran and I chat at MRC.
Okay, yeah, all right, so, all familiar. Speaking of MRC,
Okay,
updates.
updates. So, we're having a basic pet first aid class that Eileen Siegel will be presenting, and that's on May 4th. And the other thing that we continue to work on is the emergency dispensing site plan. And I discussed with Betsy today that we should send a notice, that we should have a tabletop, at a minimum, bring all the players together at this point, because we've been working on this, Betsy, myself, and several other people have been working on the plan for a year now. And in the plan are listed people, including Board of Health members, fire chief, police chief, that would all have roles in opening up an emergency dispensing site. And they don't know that they're listed on there, as far as we know, because we put their names on there, but they would have to be players, including people on the board. So we need to get all those players in a room and start discussing, if we needed to open up an emergency dispensing site, this is your role, and then we can continue to work on the plan. The plan we are working on, it lists activities and responsibilities for all the players, but players
Oh.
don't know who they are.
So you have an org chart with people's names that don't know
Yes,
they're on the chart?
That's
Correct.
correct.
okay.
So Betsy is going to notify our public health emergency planner,
See if we can get some kind of
And-
exercise together and.
and we'll notify all the players that we're going to do this, and we'll try and get a drill going. So that's what's happening with the MRC. We did have a volunteer fair that the MRC had a table on. We had 23 or so people that signed an email list that we'll send out information to as time goes on about the MRC. And we raffled off an emergency preparedness kit that you could keep in your car. So it was well received, and the group keeps meeting, and every month we have about 15 people that show up, and
Mhm.
we're going to have a table at Community Day, and there are lots of trainings going on in the region. People are getting involved because, they pick and choose what they want to do. So that's what's happening with the MRC.
Thank you,
You're welcome.
thank you. Are you still like the chairperson? Who's?
I don't know. We have-
You're the chair
No.
now. You-
We need to work out we need to work out those roles, but we will going forward.
Yeah, I did the volunteer fair and I signed up for Community Day, so we work together.
So on another note, we have our annual rabies clinic.
That's right.
This Saturday morning.
Do you need any help with that? I know.
I'm never gonna refuse to help, so,
Saturday morning.
yeah, from 9 to 11 down at the DPW garage.
I'm in town this year, so
Yeah.
I'll come down and help
Yeah.
out.
Can be for Norfolk residents,
Who actually does the inoculations?
Dr. Shelley Sandler from Bellingham Veterinary Hospital.
Okay.
So, and the cost is $15 per animal.
And I'll ask, I can send out something to see, or would you send it out and just ask people is there anybody
Sure.
interested
Yeah.
in joining us?
Yep, town clerk will be there to issue any last minute town of Norfolk dog licenses. Late fees start May 1st, I believe, for anybody who hasn't licensed their dog, so
Mhm.
they can come get their dog vaccinated and get their dog license.
I have a medical question. How long does a rabies shot last?
So it depends on, please. I didn't realize this was an official question.
Well,
There's no other type.
It depends on the manufacturer of the vaccine. So the first vaccine that we administer to puppies and kittens between around 16 weeks of age is good for a year, and then any subsequent rabies vaccine given after that is good for 3 years.
3 years.
Yes.
All
There
right.
are 1 and 3 year licensed vaccines, depending on the manufacturer.
So the one that we're talking about now is one that's good for 3?
So if they show proof of rabies vaccination, prior rabies vaccination, then yes, 3 years.
And we just had a rabid raccoon removed from our neighborhood. Yeah.
Did
So-
it actually test positive?
I don't know if we heard back yet. Did you hear anything?
Recently?
Yeah, very recently.
Oh, no, I haven't gotten any reports
Yeah.
yet. Within the last week or so?
It was, I want to say 2 weeks.
Be getting a report then.
I don't want to spread rumors. It was
Raccoons can also have distemper virus.
acting like it could have been rabbits.
Sure.
They say that.
I'm assuming the
But that potential is
animal
out there.
control officer
Yes.
took care of it and
Mm-hmm.
we'll have it tested.
Question about dioxane, a continuing question?
So, we talked about this at the last meeting, that in the December 21st, 2018 report, there was a level of dioxane detected in the landfill. And it was above the mass contingency plan limit. And the reports that I've reviewed, the one prior to that, which was in November of 2017, also had dioxane levels in the landfill. So I sent a letter to Bob McGee.
Bob
McGee. And he forwarded it to
Wayne Perry.
Wayne Perry. And Wayne said that they didn't have to report to DEP because this has been found on previous occasions, dioxane, when they do the landfill testing. So my question back to Wayne was, well, do you just keep reporting it? You don't, the town doesn't have to mitigate it at all or do anything about it? And I never got a response back.
Who's Wayne Perry?
He's the person that puts this together?
Yes.
Looks for
Oh, this says
DP.
James McQuaid on it. It should say, let me see. Bob McGee said, I'm going to forward this to Wayne, and so I'm not sure. Who-
Is the last request, did you CC Bob on that request as well, or is that just direct to?
That was just to, I think Betsy and Wayne. I'm trying to find the email too, and I'm not
So
having it.
Wayne Perry works for Stantec.
So Santec is the one that puts this report
They
together.
did the testing for the town, for
Correct.
the water.
They-
So
they
you
were
should
the
probably
one-
just CC that back to Bob, just to that gentleman too. Wayne, is that what his name was?
Yeah.
Wayne Perry.
Yeah, I mean, it might have just slipped through the cracks. Should be a pretty straightforward answer. So just try it one more time. Just CC Bob too.
Okay. I'll try
It might just be
that.
the
I mean,
fact that it's not in the drinking water, so.
I did request to a copy of the May 2018 semi-annually
Right.
annual monitoring report, which we didn't have a copy of, so.
Okay, because it says it's a semi-annual report, but I only have seen annual reports.
Right. So there should have been one May of 2018.
Right. Anyway,
But your concern
to
is
be-
that this concentration apparently is above at least one advisory level that you mentioned.
But is it for what, like, I guess the question would be, is it a drinking water reporting level? Is it just a reportable level? Is it matter that it's at a landfill and not migrating? So I
It's
think you should be able to
ground-
answer it.
it says here that the 1,4-dioxane was detected in monitoring well G30 at concentrations above the mass DEP RC of 0.3.
Microgram per liter.
Reportable
What is
concentration.
RC? Oh, reportable concentration.
But again, it depends on what you're looking at for, is it a
For what
drinking water
application?
issue? Is it a residential area? So that may have an issue with it if it's not migrating past the landfill. But again, that gentleman should be able to tell you fairly quickly.
So the level was, where's dioxane? So, RCG, I don't
GW is
have,
groundwater.
Right.
groundwater, okay. Mass contingency plan, that's what,
So they say 0.3, and these numbers were up in the what range?
well, where did it just say?
One-
Of 0.3. So it came out at 0.38.
Oh,
But then the year before, it was,
But they do test the drinking
year
water wells for
before,
that.
it was in different places, and those were 2.91,
Mhm.
but that wasn't detected in the same place this year, so I don't know where it's going.
So this site was checked.
G3D was this.
Okay.
This site, it was not detected in. this time in 2018.
Huh.
I know, isn't that weird? And it was detected at the same level.
Same level.
And then
That's
it
nice.
wasn't detected in MW3, and yet look how high it was. So I don't know where it's going. Okay, to be continued, I guess.
Well, whoever this Wayne Perry is, ought to know something about what these numbers mean.
Yeah, he's the LSP for Stantec. He's the senior project manager.
Okay. So I'll ask him again that I didn't get, I'll just mention I didn't get a
Pretty straightforward.
response. Can you tell me what this all
CC
means?
Bob McGee and CC me as well.
Okay, I'll do
Thanks,
that.
Fran.
Okay. And,
Vote to release past executive session minutes. Good Lord,
So,
going way back.
it is going way back.
I guess I've been here for over 8 years.
Town clerk has received a public records request for them. We approve them, but never, I guess the procedure is you have to vote to release them, so they can't,
Do we have any?
oh, they were approved by
they were approved by the board.
board at the time.
Right, but I guess the procedure for executive session minutes is, they have to be approved, and then the board has to also vote to release them, so that
So-
they've become public record.
Okay.
Is it a requirement to release them?
What's the difference between executive session? Our minutes don't say executive session on them.
Executive session is done, it's done in a closed session. It's usually to discuss litigation.
Okay.
It's not done in,
So we're just voting to release minutes that were already approved. Is there any
Under
reason?
executive sessions. Is there any time where executive session is not released? Is there a time frame that it's not?
I'm not sure about the time frame. I would think that if there was an ongoing litigation, you wouldn't release them until,
Is there anything going on with this anymore?
I don't know.
Like, okay, so we have a information request, right? That's what these are being released from. Do we need to first just check with town council? Is this normal? Is this what we do? Make sure there's no litigation going on, that we can release these?
Could it still be going on?
I just don't know the status of it.
Could be.
So then that might be a
Well,
good person to ask.
And what, don't we have a time frame though, right? Freedom of information to get these out?
You have to respond within, I think it's 10 days. I mean, with, at least provide them with a response.
Oh, okay, that's all, it's a
Doesn't
response.
necessarily mean you have to
Yeah.
provide them with the information.
Right. Well, maybe just run this by, just make sure there's nothing out there for litigation.
I certainly can run that by town council.
Yeah, it should be just, right, just to check. Probably nothing, but,
Well, two of these are on similar topic. The third one is something entirely different. That is what I'm thinking it is. Is the same person asking for all three?
Think so.
yeah, the elder services one, that's about the,
First name wouldn't be Al, is it?
I think
the first two are.
I think you should ask town council. And then, can you just, how can, if there's only 10 days and we don't meet for another,
It's,
What can we
I think
do?
it's fine. It's like you have to provide them with a response that, okay, we're, working on this, or,
Reviewing the request for town council.
yeah,
That's it.
exactly.
So we haven't ignored it.
Right.
okay. So then we can vote on it at the next meeting to release them.
Mm-hmm.
All right. I mean, it's
2011.
actually nothing very exciting here. It's just,
The only one I could think
It's a
of is that
process.
the first two is involving the same thing. And I
Yeah.
just want to make sure, I don't know where that case was, like I said, that was 8 years ago.
You can't remember.
You were there, man.
I know, but I don't recall.
Actually, we both were for the second one.
The second one, we both were, so I blame you.
Yeah.
2015.
Meeting schedule. So May 21st would have worked.
Okay.
Right, so we, then
You
June
can try to
10th.
come back to that, if you like.
We'll try.
All right. Meantime, we do one set up for the 10th of June.
So then we wouldn't do June 18th.
No,
If we're
we
gonna
would
do June 10th.
We'll
So then-
probably adjust after that.
But can we try and stick with the third Tuesday of the month going after that?
After we
Like
skip the
July,
18th?
August,
Yeah. July 16th and August.
20th,
Yeah, I mean,
September,
From time to time, things kind of get in the way.
of course, but
it's
just in
a-
general,
yeah, why
third
not?
Tuesday of
It's
the
nice
month.
to sort of plan, be able to plan. Yeah, I agree. All right, anticipated or unanticipated business?
I just had one other thing.
Unanticipated?
Unanticipated.
Okay.
That I think it's important, because we just got this report, and it's a cancer incidence report
Yep.
in
Yeah, I saw that,
Massachusetts.
yeah.
And I actually spoke with someone from Mass Department of Public Health, the Behavioral Health Department, just to try and get some sense about what these reports may mean, because of some things which were, the observed in our town was higher than the expected. Specifically breast cancer, melanoma of the skin, and stomach cancer. So I'm looking at a report from 2010 to 2014, and then a report from 2011 to 2015. So there's two reports here. And the numbers are very small. Breast cancer, a little bit higher numbers. In 2010 to 2014, it was 42 for females observed. Expected was 37.2.
Yeah.
Melanomas, 20 for males observed, expected 8.6. Stomach cancer was, the numbers are very small, and so there was no, they actually were not able to calculate the 95% confidence limits because of that. But there's still 4 were observed and expected was 3. And then if you go on to 2011 to 15, still breast cancer was a little bit higher than the expected. Melanoma was still higher than the expected for males, 24 observed, 9.4 expected. And stomach cancer for males, 5, and the expected was 3.3. So I just asked her, not knowing, I mean, these numbers, what do they mean if you don't know if there's a cluster around the town in an area? And so she was telling me, because she could look at the addresses of the individuals that are responsible for these numbers, that on their reporting, there are no clusters around any areas of our town for these type of cancers. So I just bring that to your attention, and if anybody in the future would like to discuss with DPH, you know, these numbers, I think, you know, there's that opportunity to do it, but she wasn't able to really say that this particular area of town, you have a high incidence of stomach cancer.
So that's good, no clusters.
Yeah. And breast cancer is tricky to look at the numbers because she explained to me that the staging of the breast cancer, if it's stage 1, stage 2, stage 3, or stage 4, makes a difference. In an educated population, people might get more testing, and so you'll see more
Earlier
stage
stages.
1 cancers, and maybe that's why the incidence is higher in your area of town, because it's detected, because people do screenings more. But that's just an example. it
Well,
could be.
these numbers, when you have, 42 and 37, 41, 39.
Right, right.
And then the 95 CL is way, way, way beyond that. It doesn't really suggest that we see anything unusual.
Yeah.
in this.
Melanoma was a little bit interesting.
Well, you have a lot of people doing yard work around these
Well,
towns. in the
this is
suburbs.
You know what, I think,
farming community,
well, it used to be.
Yeah.
A lot of
Those
people
of us who
upset.
think we still are farmers
Yeah.
tend to not put on much sunscreen.
Yeah.
But then on top of all that, I wonder if part of it's just who we are racially could have an impact on this.
Mm,
Sure.
That's true, too.
Sure,
Uh,
a lot of things. But the clustering, to me, was important. And that's what they reported, if you believe the numbers. So, okay. That was it for me, unanticipated business.
Motion to adjourn.
For one last time, huh?
One last time.
Oh,
Well,
no, first
potentially.
we need to thank Jeff for his services.
Oh, let's go back
Well,
to
We're
2011.
going to miss your perspective, sir.
I hope
you
people
know
are
what?
still listening.
Exactly. I may pop up again. I'll probably be on the other side of the
Side.
desk at a certain point.
Well, that's not good.
I know.
You know all our tricks.
Oh, yeah, hold on to the nameplate. Toss it in the desk, we'll blow off the dust in a year, maybe less.
Well, some of us have
Never know.
recycled ourselves from time to time.
Yeah, got all these different boards, different things to look at. You
Well,
start checking them off. Concom, Board of Health, planning, the zoning,
Which boards have you been on?
just Concom and Board of Health. The whole wide
That's
world
where I
of boards
started.
open,
Yeah,
zoning.
Okay,
Exactly. Been a pleasure.
thank you, thank you.
All right,
Okay,
I think we
make
are
a
going to
motion
adjourn.
adjourn.
Is a second?
Yep.
All in
All
favor?
Good luck, guys.
Aye.
Aye.